everybody, welcome to Curiously Human with Slick Vick. I apologize if you're watching this on my YouTube right now. The light is coming in and it's giving me some really cool zebra stripes going on, but I don't have my ring light up and we're just going to use some natural light coming through. If I have the window open, I'm going to be like, like too glowing of a light here. So bear with me with the visual. But for those that are listening, thank you for tuning in. This is episode 2 of Curiously Human with Slick Vick. So I'm excited to talk about the topic of today. So I'm going to read you something in which I found a creator, and I believe she was an artist, she said this in a reel, and I screenshot it and I was like, oh my gosh, I need to talk about this. And I don't know if it was her words or if it was someone else's. I didn't do a deep dive into where this originally came from, but I wrote it down here, and obviously I know the video is flipped, so you probably can't read it, but I'm going to read it out loud to you for those that are listening. So here we go. It said, witches call it spells, Christians call it prayers, spiritualists call it manifestation, atheists call it placebo effect, scientists call it quantum physics. Everyone is arguing over its name, but no one is denying its existence. When I heard that, now of course I was reading through the comments because I was like, okay, let me see what people are saying about this. Are they feeling the same way that I'm feeling about it? There were a lot of people that were feeling the same way that I was feeling about it, which was like, yes, we all have the same core concept that there's something going on. Even if we don't fully believe it, or we need evidence to believe it, or we just need faith, or we need nature, or whatever it may be, but there's something there it's helping us along in this little human journey of life that we're all going through. But there were some people who were obviously saying that's not right, or that scientists don't call it that, or whatever. The whole point, because gosh, humans are so complicated, especially in the comment sections on social media, is that no matter what you believe in, what you don't believe in, what you need to believe in something, we're all in this together. We're all connected in some crazy, wild, weird way that although a lot of us really believe wholeheartedly, this is the way that we are, and this is the only way, or this is the way that I was taught, and my parents were taught, my grandparents were, blah, blah, blah. There's something in the cosmos, there's something in the air that we all can be in some sort of agreement is there. We just call it something else. So as I just shared with you, we call things like this something else, but we all can agree that there's something there. There's something. Even the atheists that said the placebo effect, that's enough. That is enough to get us to believe in something more. So we're going to deep dive into this a little bit more. And of course, I had good old Chat GPT helping me out with getting my thoughts together. So I will be reading off of this and going back and forth and talking about this with you. So let's imagine the 5 people are sitting at a table, right? One's a Christian, one is a witch or someone who practices modern witchcraft. One is a spiritualist, one is an atheist, and one is a scientist. At first glance, you might think that these people have almost nothing in common, which is what a lot of people think when they meet someone who is not believing what they believe in. But I actually think, and I agree with this, that they have much more in common than they would realize. The Christian might look at the universe and see creation. The spiritualist might see consciousness, interconnectedness, or something greater than the individual self. The witch might find meaning in ritual, nature, symbolism, cycles, and intentionality. The atheist might say, I don't see sufficient evidence for a supernatural being, so I don't believe one exists. And the scientist might say, I want to know what we can actually test, measure, observe, and replicate. Those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive statements. They're answering different questions. And that's where I think we get ourselves into trouble. Science is not a religion. Let's start with science. Science is incredibly powerful. Gosh, isn't it? I absolutely love science. It has given us medicine, technology, astronomy, genetics, neuroscience, vaccines, space exploration. It has allowed us to understand things about reality that humans couldn't even imagine thousands of years ago. But science also has boundaries. Science is a method for investigating the natural world. But that doesn't mean science has to answer every philosophical question a human being can ask. For example, what makes a life meaningful? What should I value? What makes something beautiful? What is the right way to live? Those questions can involve science, but they aren't purely scientific questions. And that's important because respecting science doesn't mean we have to pretend science has answered every question humanity has ever asked. At the same time, respecting spirituality doesn't mean we get to call something scientifically proven simply because it feels meaningful. Those are two very different things. And I think we need to get comfortable with saying, I don't really know. Isn't that so true, my friends? Get comfortable saying, I don't really know. Why are we so quick to argue about things in which, sure, we might believe in a little bit or maybe a lot, but then a question comes up and we're like grasping at straws because maybe the way that the question was given to us made us believe something else for a second. And instead of observing that and maybe questioning it more and saying, gosh, that's a really good question, I don't know, we get offensive and we get aggressive. Okay. The power of I don't know. Honestly, I think I don't know might be one of the most intellectually honest sentences a person can say. So true. And the older I get, I agree with this because a younger me would want to be the person in which I just explained to you, which would be aggressive and fighting tooth and nail to not admit that maybe I was incorrect in a belief system or incorrect in a way of thinking that wasn't going to be intentionally helping the situation or the conversation happening. We don't know everything about consciousness. And we don't know exactly why consciousness exists. We don't fully understand the brain. That's so true. And we don't understand everything about the universe. There are enormous questions in physics, biology, neuroscience, philosophy, and consciousness that we're still trying to understand. I believe we will continuously, forever, ever, ever try to understand. And that uncertainty doesn't have to be scary. It can be exciting because uncertainty gives us room for curiosity, which is why I named this The Curious Human. Okay, the problem happens when uncertainty becomes an invitation for us to fill in the blanks with absolute certainty. Absolutes are really, really, really dangerous, by the way. Someone experiences something they can't explain and says, therefore, this proves my spiritual belief. Someone else hears it and says, that's impossible. You're irrational. And suddenly, neither person is curious anymore. They're defending an identity. Goodness gracious. Mind Hacking Happiness, Sean Webb talks about your self map. If you don't know who I'm talking about, look it up. A very good friend of mine, Andy, actually purchased the books for me and his whole course on Mind Hacking Happiness. And he talks about this. He talks about how so many humans are going through so many chronic diseases, if you will, mental things going on that are unfavorable because we are attached to so many things in this lifetime, in this universe, in this world that we're living in. So if you believe that the color blue is the best color blue in the world and someone else comes up to you and says it's not, and you can't take that as a different belief system, and they say the color blue is horrible, you will take that as a personal attack on you. And we do this with everything. We do this with sports teams, with holidays, with hair colors, with just if you send your kid to public school or private schools or homeschooled. I mean, everything becomes so much an identity and who we are and how we show up in this world. And if you attack that, you are just, even the concept of it, you are attacking that person. And that's where we get so much just craziness in our body and our world, and that's how wars are and blah blah blah. But anyways, let's talk about faith and evidence. And this is where Christians and scientists sometimes get placed unnecessarily on opposite sides. Faith and evidence aren't necessarily the same category. If someone says, my faith gives me and my life meaning, science doesn't necessarily have to respond. Prove it. Because they're not necessarily making a scientific claim. But if someone says, this supernatural phenomenon has been scientifically demonstrated, now we're in a different conversation. And now evidence matters. And I think spirituality can actually become stronger when we're willing to distinguish between what I know, what I believe, what I experience, and what I'm willing to investigate. Those aren't the same thing. Let's talk about witchcraft and spiritual practice. And this is where I think modern witchcraft can become an interesting part of the conversation. Because when many people hear the word witch, what was the first thing you thought about, by the way? Think about that. Grasp it, have it go in your noggin, swirl it around, feel it in your body. Does it feel good? Does it feel uncomfortable? Does it feel bad? Does it feel what? Where is that? Okay. They immediately imagine something extreme. You probably did. Maybe not. I don't know. Depends on your belief. But historically and culturally, practices associated with witchcraft have often involved things like nature, herbs, rituals, symbolism, seasonal cycles, divination, community traditions, and attempts to understand or interact with the world around us. Today, people practice witchcraft for many different reasons. Some see it as a spirituality, some see it as a religion, some see it as a personal ritual, some see it as a psychology and symbolism. Some believe in supernatural forces. Others don't. And that's okay. You don't have to reduce everyone's practice to one definition. But there's also an important line here. If a ritual makes someone feel grounded, focused, connected, or intentional, we can explore the psychological mechanisms involved without pretending that we've scientifically proven a supernatural explanation. For example, ritual itself can influence attention, expectation, emotion, and behavior. That's something neuroscience and psychology can investigate. Whether there's an additional supernatural component, ? That's a separate question, and it's okay to leave that question open. The atheist, let's talk about the atheist, okay? And atheism deserves the same respect. An atheist isn't necessarily someone who hates religion. An atheist may simply not believe that there is a sufficient evidence for a god or gods. That's a position someone can arrive at through philosophy, personal experience, skepticism, or many other reasons. And honestly, a person doesn't need to believe in the supernatural to live an incredibly meaningful, compassionate, spiritual feeling life. So true, you guys. You can experience awe without believing in God. And you can love nature without believing nature is sacred. You can also meditate without believing in energy fields. And you can practice gratitude without believing the universe is sending you manifestations. You can be deeply curious about consciousness without believing consciousness is supernatural. Meaning doesn't belong exclusively to religion. The Christian. And Christianity deserves the same nuance. There are millions of Christians who are thoughtful, intellectually curious people. People who study philosophy, people who study science, people who question their own beliefs. People who understand that having faith doesn't require treating everyone else as an enemy. And I personally know a lot of Christians who are like this, so it's true. A Christian can believe deeply in God while still acknowledging, I don't know everything. And they can interact with someone who doesn't believe without needing to convert them in every conversation. That's where I think religion becomes beautiful rather than a division. When faith becomes an invitation rather than a weapon, then we can start talking. The common ground, though, because here's what all 5 of these people can potentially agree upon. You guys ready? We are human beings. We experience love. We experience grief. We experience awe. We experience fear. We experience curiosity. We experience consciousness. We wonder why we're here. And we wonder what happens when we die. We wonder whether there is something bigger than ourselves. And we're all trying to make sense of an extraordinarily complicated existence. One person may call that God. Another may call it nature. Another may call it consciousness. Another may say there is no greater meaning at all. And another may say, I don't know yet. I really don't know. But underneath all of those perspectives is a human being trying to understand this reality. So let's talk about the real problem here. I don't think the biggest problem is that people believe different things. I think the bigger problem is when people become incapable of questioning their own beliefs. I agree. Because there's a difference between conviction and certainty. You can be deeply convicted about something and still remain open to learning. You can say, this is what I currently believe, instead of, this is the only possible truth, and anyone who disagrees with me is stupid, evil, ignorant, or brainwashed. Gosh, that's like all over the internet and all in our communities and our conversations. The second attitude doesn't create wisdom, clearly. It creates tribalism. And this can happen anywhere. Religion can become this way, and spirituality become this way. Atheism, science, political communities can all come this way. But human beings are really good at creating an us and a them. And that's a lot of times what gets very blurry here. The bridge, which is what I'm all about. Maybe the bridge isn't finding one belief system that everybody agrees on. Maybe the bridge is learning how to disagree without dehumanizing each other. Imagine a Christian talking to an atheist and saying, tell me why you don't believe. Not because they're preparing their counter argument, but because they're genuinely wanting to understand. Imagine atheists saying to a Christian, tell me why your faith gives you ... Not because they're trying to dismantle it, but because they're actually curious. Imagine a scientist asking a spiritual person, what do you experience during your practice? And the spiritual person asking, well, what does the research actually say? Now we're having a conversation. Now we are learning from one another. So the science and spirituality connection. This is actually the space I'm truly fascinated by. Not because I think science needs spirituality to be valid, but because I think human beings benefit from being able to explore both. Neuroscience can help us understand meditation. Psychology can help us understand rituals. Anthropology can help us understand religious traditions. History can help us understand how spiritual practices evolved. Physics can help us understand the universe. Philosophy can help us ask what any of it really means. And spirituality can provide people with frameworks for reflection, meaning, connection, and personal transformation. We don't have to force one discipline to become another. We can let each one of these questions we can let each one ask the questions it's actually equipped to ask. Apologize. The important distinction, but there's something I want to be very clear about. Being open-minded does not mean believing everything. And skepticism does not mean being closed-minded. You can say, I'm open to the possibility, but I don't currently have enough evidence to believe it. That's an incredibly reasonable position. You can also say, I believe this because of my personal experience, but I recognize that my experience isn't scientific proof. That's intellectually honest. And you can say, I don't believe this, but I'm interested in understanding why other people do. That's curiosity. And I think we need more of all three. So maybe, just maybe, the goal isn't to create a world where the witch becomes a Christian, or the Christian becomes an atheist, or an atheist becomes a spiritual person, or the scientist becomes a mystic. Maybe the goal is something much simpler. Maybe we learn how to sit at the same table, to ask questions, to listen, to challenge ideas without attacking people, to distinguish belief from evidence, to distinguish personal experience from scientific proof, to admit when we don't know, and to remain curious enough to keep learning. Because I don't think humanity's greatest achievement will be getting everyone to believe in the same thing. I think it will be learning how to live peacefully with people who don't. You can believe in God. You can believe in nothing supernatural. You can believe and practice witchcraft. You can practice spirituality, and you can dedicate your life to science. And you can still look at another human being and say, I don't believe what you believe, but I respect your right to search for meaning in your own way. Because at the end of the day, we're all standing underneath the same sky. We're all trying to understand the same universe. And we're all asking questions. Maybe we don't need the same answers. Maybe we just need to learn how to ask better questions together. And always stay curious. Well, I apologize for the little bit as to where I was fumbling with my words, but I believe that this was a beautiful way to describe my current belief system, which is that perhaps we don't have to just believe in one single thing. I think and believe right now that the core of all our beliefs are to have peace and possibly love be present in our lives. And I believe a lot of these communities and I would say labels for these different individuals that I've talked about have a center core wanting to live in peace and live with love and share that with other people. But I think where we have just gone into deep ends and tipped over into different negative spaces within these communities is where we try to control everyone else, and we try to have everyone else believe in what we believe in, and we tried to label every single aspect of our life, and it just caused so much resistance and honestly a lot of pressure on every community to act and look and practice and be a certain way. And if you stepped outside of that, you were no longer accepted in that community. And so those who are brought up into those type of communities, the moment they try to tiptoe in other areas, they're seen as outcast or they're seen as wrong. And that does a lot to a person, especially when humans are so interconnected with other humans and we are so community based, and we want that affection and connection and empathy and compassion from one another, that we will stop belief systems and get aggressively just into whatever it is that we're into in that moment and believe in just that. And a lot of times it is also because it has gotten us out of really dark, deep places. I know a lot of people who have turned to different faiths and beliefs and practices because at one point in time they were very low, they were going through a lot, and that practice, that belief, that religion, that community got them out of that horrible place, and now they are forever grateful, of course, for those individuals and communities and beliefs. But they make that their entire life, so much so that they forget that at one point in time they didn't maybe even know about that. And I don't think they mean to, but I think in sharing their stories and sharing their life, at times they look down upon people who don't have the same belief system as them, or they don't practice what they practice. And it should be sharing and not forcing. It should be sharing and not judging. So with all that being said, I think this is a really amazing conversation that hopefully more of us have, and more of us try to branch out and expand our minds about. And I'm not saying that if you are labeling yourself as just the individuals in which I've just addressed. So if you say that you are a witch or a Christian or a scientist or whatever, and you feel very proudly in that, and you feel very good in that you can't live the rest of your life with that label and feel good about it. 100%. You should. The bigger point of all this is labels are labels. And if that's what you feel confident in walking around with, 100% do it. I do it as well. But don't be too lost in the sauce of what you believe in to negate everyone else as wrong, and to think about everyone else who thinks differently as you as wrong, evil, horrible, negative, less than. That's where we're messing up. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be different flavors. I mean, imagine opening up a jelly bean bag and they're all just butter popcorn, although that is a delicious flavor. Gosh, I love the root beer one, and the marshmallow, and the strawberry, and the cherry, and the watermelon. And we would never be able to taste these different flavors if we didn't have them present. So taste them, find the ones that you enjoy, maybe get more of those bags of buttered popcorn jelly beans, but once in a while, try some different ones here and there. And don't say that all the other ones are bad. They're preferences, they're what we connect to, what we don't connect to, what we connect to more, what makes sense for us. But they're beliefs. And treat it as that. And treat others with respect and their own beliefs. Whew. All right. Well, I hope that was helpful today to someone. And if you feel like it would be helpful for someone else to hear this, please share it. Please let me know through the comment section what you thought. And as always, stay curious. All right, guys, I hope you have a lovely morning, a lovely afternoon, and a lovely evening whenever you're listening to this. Sorry again for the crazy stripes that I got from the sun, although I kind of like them. Thanks for listening and watching, and I will talk to y'all soon.